This is Eric with Astrology for Awakening. Mercury conjunct Uranus, the flash of liberation. This is an aspect of awakening, if we can attune to it, if we can open to it. So here's a prayer or invocation for attuning to this aspect. Take a breath, turn within and follow along. Oh, illuminating presence. Illuminating presence. Help us to open without fear, without contraction, to thy lightning bolts of liberation. Strengthen and support us that we might welcome the clarity, recognize the vision, and integrate the revelation of this time, and thus bring greater freedom into our lives, individually and collectively. Now, for many years, of course, with the Uranus and Saturn, Uranus the liberator, Saturn the structuring energy, the tradition, they've been in this dance of discovering what does it really mean to be free. And there are many levels, of course. There's sociological, there's personal, there's financial, there's physical levels, and there's spiritual and awakening levels. And in the Astrology for Awakening, we tend to focus on how can we attune to the daily, weekly, monthly aspects as invitations to open us to a deeper communion with life and a deeper embodiment of our true nature. And so this conjunction is a symbol of the breaking through the illuminative power of divine insight to, like a thunderbolt, like a lightning bolt, to break through the everyday mind of Mercury, the mind, being illuminated by the lightning bolt of Uranus. Now this Mercury travels around the zodiac quite rapidly, 120 days approximately. And so it comes around and touches Uranus regularly, a couple times a year. And that's a good thing, because the mind does have a tendency to fall into ruts, to lose itself in habits of thought that are not liberational. And so this encounter is the encounter kind of a reset, of a refresh, of a reorientation, of realigning the mental models of our life with a fresh vision. It's an encounter that brings the possibility of a sudden, of an uncontrived, often unexpected bolt of energy and of vision that can crash through the gates, can sometimes be experienced like that, like it's a crashing through the gates of our personality and shattering our comforting and self-reinforcing and self-protective walls of beliefs, of conditioned values, and of our kind of historically defined identity. C.G. Jung writes about the symbol of the lightning bolt, which is one of the images of Uranus par excellence. He writes, lightning signifies a sudden, unexpected, and overpowering change of psychic condition. These are all Uranus signifiers, sudden, unexpected, and it overpowers the familiar construct of identity. It's a liberational energy that, from the egoic perspective, which is all about self-protection, the breakthrough, even of divine energy, can be experienced as an intrusion, as a destabilizing force. And it is destabilizing. I remember my painting teacher at the Art Institute of Chicago quoting Picasso, saying that there's this idea of creative destruction. It's destruction in the service of creation, and that's Uranus. It's destabilization in the service of reorganizing our identity, our belief systems, our mental models. So the Intrusion, from the egoic perspective, is a thief kind of kicking open the door. But that's because that part of us, that conditioned part of us, wants to maintain a moat, a wall of self-protection, a definition of identity that is structured and immovable. And what is also, unbeknownst to the ego, the ongoing source of our suffering, because every solution that is imagined or envisioned from within the walls of our conditioning are perpetuating that very conditioning. So in this conjunction, Mercury, which is the archetype of the mind, the familiar thoughts, the certainties, that's a key idea. The certainties that we have about self, about world, about the way things are, is now illuminated by divine lightning. This is Uranus, which is associated in esoteric traditions with the experience of Kundalini, the energy and intelligence of the divine mother, of the energy of nature itself, which is coiled up or encoded in the structures of the body and in the patternings of the mind. It's held within that structure, and it needs to be liberated, woke up, awakened. The striking of the Uranian lightning bolt wakes it up. I remember when I traveled for business, I always thought it was funny that they often in the Marriott hotels, there would be a quotation from the founder, Bill Marriott. And he said, in this quote, "You are asleep until something wakes you." You know, he was referring to their, wake-up calls. But it's a truism. We are asleep until something wakes us up. And that's Uranus. Uranus is the wake-up call. And it's not so much that the Kundalini is asleep. It's more like we are asleep to that which is present right here, right now, in your very body and your very mind. And when Mercury returns to Uranus, it's the alarm bell of the spirit. It's the wake-up call of the spirit, shaking us out of our slumber and demanding that we open our eyes to receive a refreshed and unconditioned vision of life. Jung again writes, and he speaks of biblical imagery. Moses, he writes, Moses' rock-splitting staff, which struck forth, releasing living waters that are changed into the serpent, is a symbol of the unconscious that's always there in the background. So this unconscious energy, this life force, actually is always there, and it can be liberated. The Christian mystic Jakob Boehm says, in this spirit of the fire flash, that's another image of Uranus, the fire flash, there is the great almighty life itself. So this is the breaking open, he says, so that liberty shines forth as a flash, another Uranian image. And it's important, I hope you hear how in the mystical teachings of all traditions, you find these astrological metaphors precisely applied. It's astrology for awakening. It's saying that the lightning bolt is for the birth of light, for the birth of life, for the liberation of consciousness. And that's its purpose. Astrology's deeper purpose is to help us to tune into that awakening energy. Yes, it will bring unexpected phone calls, perhaps unexpected visits, disturbances in the field of your everyday communications. Why? What's the purpose of this disturbance in the field? It's awakening. It's Uranus saying, break out of your habits of mind. And so there's a theme that we find in myths around the world of the lightning bolts coming down. And usually it's framed as punishment, okay? But this sense of the lightning bolts of illumination being a punishment is the description from the ego side. It's like, don't wake me up, is essentially the mantra of the conditioned self. But thankfully, our deeper self, our soul level, has made as in a covenant with life and have entered into life experience in order to awaken. The great Tibetan Lama who brought one of the key figures bringing Tibetan Buddhism from east to west was a gentleman named Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche. He had a center in Boulder, Colorado, and he was a very Uranian figure. Within his own tradition, he broke patterns in order to, he felt, bring the authentic, illuminative, life-transforming revelation of that meditative path to the West, to bring the Dharma to the West. And he said in one of his texts, treading the spiritual path is painful. It is a constant unmasking and peeling off of layer after layer of masks. These self-constructed, culturally conditioned identities are masks. And he goes, it involves insult after insult. So that's the Uranus. It's like, hitting the mind and going, really? The mind says, this is so embarrassing to have my flaws, my foibles, my blind spots, illuminated by the light of Uranus. But this is its purpose. Mercury does have an affinity for Uranus. Mercury himself is a shapeshifter. Mercury is the mind that can travel in all realms, and Uranus is reminding us of that, waking the mind up to a more authentic vision of reality and to a fuller capacity to travel into the upper spheres, the lower spheres, to receive, in other words, to become a pure receiver of wisdom and insight beyond the horizon of our conditioned awareness. And in our personal lives, this represents the opportunity to shake off our drowsy and lazy, conditioned cultural mindsets and ideologies and to pierce through the mental models that create suffering for self and other. And collectively, it's clear we are in a period of wake up. Wake up. It's a radical time to unmask the ways that we have collectively and unconsciously been participating in the perpetuation of suffering and destruction for humans, for the ecosystem. So this tendency of the waking up process can be destabilizing, and it's possible in this process for us to become egoically identified with the thunder god. And when we do that, instead of receiving the lightning bolts of illumination, we point the angry finger of illumination at other people, critiquing them and identifying their obvious flaws. But to critique and to complain and to have the focus be on others' blindness is often an indication that we have become unconsciously identified with the anger God energy, and we are not allowing it to actually awaken us. And blaming other people never turns out very well for them or for us. So this aspect of Mercury and Uranus is an invitation to open ourselves up to the uncomfortable but liberating energy that will deconstruct in a flash our cherished certainties. Now, if we've been doing our spiritual practices, if we've been meditating, if we've been cultivating our familiarity with the experience of deconstruction, of breaking open, then this aspect itself will be slightly less disorienting. But, you know, there's no guarantees that we won't have some wobbling, some shattering, because Mercury, the mind, is plugging itself into Uranus, the cosmic source of insight and awakening. In the East, this process is known as the path of sudden illumination. It's the flash of vision. So once upon a Zen time, after many months of wholehearted practice, a nun, a great Zen practitioner, female practitioner, went out into the full moon night to draw some water from the well. And the bottom of her old bucket, which was held together with bamboo strips, suddenly gave way, and the reflection of the moon vanished with the water. And when she saw this, she attained the great realization, the sudden illumination. And she wrote the following poem. With this and with that, I tried to keep the bucket together. And then the bottom fell out. Where water does not collect, the moon does not dwell. Think about it. With this and that, I tried to keep the bucket together. How many ways do we try to tape up, duct tape, patch up, tie up, wire up our life? We try to hold it together. Collectively, certainly we try to do that. Individually, we definitely try to hold it together. But then the grace of Uranian energy is the bottom fell out. The bottom fell out. All of those patterns of holding together were released. And she writes, where water does not collect, the moon does not dwell. In this symbolism, water represents the emotional attachments of identity and beliefs and values. We're trying to hold them together, preserve them, protect us from change, from awakening. Let it go. The mental models that we hold so dear, individually and collectively, we try to keep the bucket together. But during this aspect, we are having the invitation to experience a breakthrough. Again, oh, illuminating presence, help us, help me, help you, help us to open undefendedly to the illuminating bolts of liberation. Strengthen our nervous systems, strengthen my nervous system, strengthen your nervous system, that it might welcome the clarity, recognize the vision, and integrate the revelation, and thus bring greater freedom individually and collectively into life itself.